Here's a timestamp for the deck overview, and another for the match. Times are also in the description. Hey there, for any people who follow me, I will still be uploading for fighting games. But I'm also going to be posting all sorts of different things on my channel, starting with this series of learning Faeria and the card game genre. Faeria and Duelist are favorites of mine, but admittedly, I never moved out of just being a casual throwing silly or cool things together in my deck. For anyone in the same situation as myself, or who have an interest but are inexperienced in the genre, this will serve as both a guide of sorts, as well as a documentation of my journey from modest beginnings. It might sound weird to look to learn from someone that doesn't already know almost everything, but I have well enough mastery over teaching myself for anything new that I pick up. Even if it is a genre that I don't have any experience in, I know what to look for and how to train to develop myself. If that sounds like a skill you'd like to develop while also learning Faeria with me, then you're in the right place. The deeper dive into the specific mechanics and basic theory will be for dedicated videos, so let's move to the deck structure. First off, the main focus of the deck is combat effect cards, featuring Krog the Ogre King. Hence the clever title of the deck. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted for copy count for each card, but this is what I settled on. There is a secondary strategy and theme of Faeria generation and cost reduction that naturally comes with some of the cards, but we'll cover that shortly. In order of ascending cost, we start with Underground Brigand. Like Underground Boss later in the deck, this unit gains Faeria if it has the chance to fight something. Wasting a control card on this isn't in the opponent's interest, so Brigand's effective cost will be 1 Faeria most of the time. With that considered, we can see that its stats are acceptable, and if given the chance to fight more than once, you actually gain more than you spent on playing them. Hitting the opponent also obviously counts as combat, so striking the opponent instead of another unit increases the likelihood this card will more than pay for itself. I have 3 Underground Brigands to increase its presence in the deck, which also increases the chances of me drawing it in general. Next, we have Fire Elementals. The stats look nice, but its low HP leaves it vulnerable to events or unit abilities that deal damage. The purpose of Elementals is to be able to expand at a similar speed as neutral deck players, to expend faster than other Elemental deck players that do not have Elementals, as well as having the special land amount needed for more expensive cards sooner. As an aside, I have a soft spot for the aesthetics of all 4 Elementals. I find them kind of adorable. There are 2 Fire Elementals in this deck to not take up too much space other cards could have in the deck, while still giving me a decent chance at drawing them earlier. Bloodsong helps with overall cost effectiveness of cards in my deck, and this card looks to have a very strong value for its requirement. Playing this costs 4 Faeria, but it reduces Faeria costs up to a possible 8. The more cards in your hand, the more likely it is to get the full effectiveness of this effect, but also the higher chances of not having a strong reduction to one card's cost in particular. The real cost is the 4 damage you deal to yourself, which shouldn't really be an issue. After all, health is a resource to use, but to use carefully. That's why I only have 1 copy of this card in my deck. The randomness of the reduction, as well as the possible vulnerability you put yourself in for playing this multiple times, factors into the decision as well. I have enough Faeria generation and cost reduction in my deck otherwise to avoid limiting this to 1 copy as well. Next, Gift of Steel seems like one of the core cards for the combat effect archetype. On its own, it's a little expensive for just 3 attack, but on combat units you can give them health as well. Gift of Steel and Herald of War are the only cards that can give health within pure red, while Emerald Salamander and Crackthorn Beast give health and more so connection with their green hybrid nature. Gift of Steel enables us to add some meatiness to almost any unit within our deck, with the main benefit of being the luxury of choice in how and when we allot these stats. The cost of Gift of Steel can be considered added to the unit it is applied to, so cost reductions really make this card especially valuable in my opinion. Bloodsong has great synergy with having Gift of Steel and the unit that you want to apply it to within your hand at the same time, since you potentially have a free unit and a free massive stat increase. There are 3 Gift of Steel cards in this deck to capitalize off of the majority of the units being combat effect units. I want to have access to this at almost all times, and having 3 copies also gives me up to 3 opportunities to use this option. Having more copies means that the opponent has to spend more cards to deal with your buff units, making the decision harder for them to make when considering value exchange and card code advantage, when looking at damage or control abilities to deal with the problem you present them. The opponent having to spend resources to deal with something that will potentially not cost me anything, or effectively much less resources than the opponent, is a strong position of advantage to have over them. Next up is Grimguard. At first, I thought the mouth of the inner creature was just a shaded nose, but it still looks kinda creepy and cute at the same time either way. This is one of the 3 cards within Pure Red that has access to Taunt, the other 2 being Devouring Plant and Ogre Battler. With enough ogres, you could consider the board a multi-ogre battle arena, but it isn't a combat card, so let's ignore that for now. Devouring Plant is cheaper, but cannot move due to being a structure, and no ability to move otherwise. Grimguard comes with the benefit of dealing damage to the opponent directly every time it fights something, even the opponent themselves. If I have to play somewhat defensively, this is a nice way to butter up the opponent for a heavier hit later on in the match. If I don't have my big units or cost reductions yet and I'm able to attack the opponent directly, then that raises the unit's effective damage to 4. In that situation, I'll still have an extra 2 damage to deal to the opponent if they use another unit to destroy my Grimguard. As with how I previously mentioned its taunt ability, the Grimguard can be placed in areas that can control large amounts of space where the opponent might want to summon or move units onto. Grimguard's health is higher than typical fodder attack, so it should be able to tie up at least 2 units most of the time while also dealing direct damage to the opponent in the process. There are 3 copies of Grimguard in the deck to maximize its presence in the deck. The potential damage I can inflict to the opponent without having to cross the board to get to them increases greatly this way, as does my board control and defensive ability with Taunt. Like Gift of Steel, Herald of War is a way to beef up my other units. Herald's health and attack numbers are high enough to dissuade or prevent minor commitment removal. It is kind of like Mace Man that has a great additional ability, at the cost of having special land requirement. 2 special lands as a requirement is rather low to me, and having Herald of War early on seems like a huge boon. The potential to apply Gift of Steel levels of bonuses to units I haven't even played yet looks too valuable to pass up, and its synergy with the Gift of Steel is obvious. I have 3 copies of Herald of War, so I have the best chance at having this early, while also having a presence within my deck for the rest of the game. Underground Boss is an interesting card compared to Brigand. The effect is the same at gaining 2 Faeria on combat, but its stats are increased by 1 attack and 2 health, along with the Faeria cost by 2. 5 health increases its chances of fighting twice, which would result in the effective cost of this card being 1 Faeria. Reducing the cost of this card just by 2 is still good, considering its stats looking decent for a 3-cost unit. Depending on the circumstances, Underground Boss has the potential to fight more than 3 times, meaning like Brigand, the card will eventually pay for itself. Factoring in cost reduction cards, Brigand and Boss can just be straight Faeria gain on their first fight. There's a strong theme of return of investment here. Another interesting, but weird card is Bursting Hippo. It kind of reminds me of the Hungry Hippos game. Anyway, Bursting Hippo is similar to Blazing Salamander in its utility to distribute damage in an area around it. Unlike Blazing Salamander, Bursting Hippo has more damage, costs 1 Faeria and 1 special land more, and the damage is applied on combat. Since Hippo is a combat effect unit, I can buff it through Gift of Steel and Herald of War, making this a rather chunky unit potentially. The damage effect applies to enemies, meaning the effective damage when striking the opponent directly is increased by 2. 2 direct hits on the opponent from a Bursting Hippo with a Gift of Steel can end the match, and its high health at that point would make it difficult to take down swiftly. Being able to damage units that you don't want to trade hits with is also a boon to keep in mind, as well as being able to burn down fodder in an area when striking something more important. There are 2 copies of Bursting Hippo because while it is strong, it is still expensive. I don't want it to be in my hand at the start, but I still want it to be relevant for the match later on. Fragmenter is a fun one. Its stats aren't particularly great for its cost, and if the token unit is summoned on your turn, it might be easy for the opponent to remove from the board. However, its notable base health amount means that if the opponent attacks Fragmenter without cleaning up the fragment token units, then you have much more damage to apply to a target within a large area. Attacking the opponent directly with Fragmenter can be disastrous and result in a snowball win. Using Gift of Steel on a Fragmenter to increase its health and damage allows it to contend with other big units, or produce a large number of fragments when challenged with a swarm. I have no other mecha synergy in the deck, but its inclusion looks strong to me as it covers an aspect of the game the other cards in my deck do not, while also still having combat effect synergy. Next is Kobold Warlord. Its stats are nice enough, and its land cost is actually really low with just 1 special land required. You can fit cards like this in other decks with low commitment to red as a color in your deck. Kobold Warlord's combat effect is effectively Gift of Steel without consideration for if the unit is a combat effect unit or not. Gift of Steel would make Kobold Warlord my unit with the second highest health in the deck at 10, while also bringing its damage up to 8. This unit can end up a terror under the right circumstances. I have 2 copies of Kobold Warlord so that if the opponent uses some kind of control to remove the first, I will have a backup at some point later on. They call him Red Devil! Wait, this is a game with OTKs, not H and K. Anyway, Red Devil is rather expensive at 9 Faeria, but its effective cost is guaranteed to be 4 Faeria due to its gift ability of gaining 5 Faeria back after summoning it. For a 4-cost unit, its stats are a little higher than normal, but its real strength shines when you consider cost reduction effects from other cards. If Bloodsong affects Red Devil for all 8 Faeria to be reduced, then Red Devil will cost 1. Seeing that it gains 5 Faeria when you summon it, it will pay for itself and Bloodsong. The end result is the same. However, here I paid life in exchange for being able to play Red Devil whenever I felt like it, as opposed to only when I had 9 Faeria. Surplus Faeria gained from Underground Brigand and Boss can also attribute to alleviate the effective cost of doing that combo, as well as the next card on the list. I have 2 copies of Red Devil to have some units with high base stats while being very cost effective, which in some cases can result in gaining me a Faeria surplus under the right conditions. Krog the Ogre King is a big one, but I don't mean because he's a massive ogre. This cost is 12 Faeria and 4 special lands, which is rather steep. His starting attack is 2, which leaves him vulnerable to Aurora's Trick and Choking Sands, but has combo potential with Humbling Vision, Savor of the Meek, and either Emerald Salamander, Crackthorn Beast, or both. That's a little crazy, so let's bring it back to Krog. Krog has a support card called Krog's Dinner, but I won't be using that within this deck since Krog isn't the core focus of the deck's strategy or its theme. Krog reduces the cost of a random card in your hand by a whopping 7 Faeria, but as you might notice from my deck list, that I only have 7 out of 30 cards that this effect can fully reap the rewards for, thus limiting Krog's potential effectiveness. However, since the cards that would be free when affected by Krog are a large majority, my options will open up significantly by being able to play my cards whenever I want to later on. If Krog manages to fight a few times, he will still effectively pay for himself while being a massive target to distract my opponent with. Again, because he's valuable, and not because he's the size of an elephant. I will then be able to play my cards with more freedom due to the lack of cost, so the decisions I have to make regarding Faeria will become much easier. Since Krog is a legendary, I am stuck with having a limit of 1 of him in my deck. Having no added draw power or search ability from Krog's Dinner forces me to rely on Krog as a second strategy to complement my main strategy. Since the deck is also sorted by land color, next is Air Elemental. Its stats are comparable to the Fire Elemental, but its attack is lower in exchange for being able to fly over the sea. If drawn very early on, it can harvest Faeria without me having to build a land in that direction, which is doubly valuable with its gift of creating an additional special land. As you can see, this is important for enabling the next card on the list, since it would otherwise be too time-consuming to spit out 3 deserts. Air Elemental can also cross the sea to ignore how the opponent and I form land strategically, giving it more utility in combat with its ability to position in places I wouldn't normally have access to. There are only 2 copies of Air Elemental for the same reason as Fire Elemental. I would like them early, but I don't want elementals to have too strong of a presence in my deck since it would take up space other cards deserve more. Last, but not least, is a single Scourge Flame Spectre. Red's only access to haste, and one of 2 cards with charge, and it's through a hybrid color card that is rather expensive. It costs 7 Faeria and 6 special lands, 3 red and 3 yellow. Without elementals, I would not be able to put this on the board sooner than turn 6. Elementals reduce this to turn 4, but much more importantly, I'm lining myself up to place multiple deserts at the same time whenever I want. Originally, I placed this card in due to it just having a combat effect. That was a really simple thought that led me to consider the card's place within the deck and its potential. I can see this being part of a one-turn kill strategy in a few different ways, as well as with completely different deck structure compared to this one. Scorchflame Spectre's effective damage on direct hits is 5, boosted by its combat ability like Grimguards, Shadim Brutes, and Bursting Hippo's abilities. The combination of that, with haste, flying, and charge 2, means that you can easily position this unit in a way where it can strike at the opponent directly. Synergy with Herald of War, Gift of Steel, and Kobold Warlord would cause Scorchflame Spectre's attack to skyrocket within a single turn. Krog, Blood Dance, and the Underground Brigand and Boss respectively make access to this card's Faeria cost trivial, while the Elementals allow me to place my special lands when I want to, rather than having to limit my board expansion early. I very much look forward to playing around with this card in the future. Having only one copy of Scorchflame Spectre means I won't see this card often until after midgame, but since the overall structure of the deck does not entirely rely upon it to be effective and win, I can manage without it. It both fits in with my main strategy as a sort of short-ranged cavalry unit with haste to fill in most of the rest of what the deck lacks, while also functioning as a tertiary strategy win condition I can play with if the opportunity presents itself. A summary of the strategy being, to use the synergy between combat effect cards to assert myself early on and in the mid-game. If the match looks like it will go to late game, I can play in around 2 backup strategies. If progressing doesn't seem possible, I can hold my line while building Faeria, cost reduction application, and dealing damage to the opponent through buffed Grimguards and Scorchflame Spectre. I have elementals to make expanding smoother and faster, and in place of added draw power, I can use the universal mechanic of drawing an extra card instead of placing land, since I'll usually have enough land by the time I'll be running low on cards anyway. The deck lacks unit removal through events, but Bursting Hippo's area of effect damage, Grimguard's taunt, Fragmenter's extra token units, and Scorchflame Spectre's haste should cover that well enough for me. Finally jumping into the game, I started with Fire Elemental, Underground Boss, and Grimguard as my starting hand going first. Since I didn't have Explore from going second, I placed 2 Prairies, since I wouldn't be able to afford my Elemental turn 1 anyway. Doing it this way doesn't tip what element I have immediately, allows me to expand a little further, and gives me the choice of which well I want to expand to turn 2. Drawing Red Devil is kind of lamentable, but I have Grim and Boss ready to place. I thought it was interesting to see blue-green since I haven't ran into multicolored decks yet. Here I'm deciding on whether to prepare for my Bursting Hippo or enable Air Elemental if drawn soon. The Elemental isn't in my hand yet, so it's safer to open up all the options I do have presently. Grimguard was tempting for the early burn and to prevent the opponent from running to their Faeria well, but this is a great opportunity to make extra Faeria with Boss first. My opponent places another special land, although they have a good opportunity to block off expansion on the right. Placing the special land on the opposite side, or prairies in a line southeast from the Yak while summoning something on the closest tile between our units would have done the job. Seeing that my elemental is weak enough to trade with, they moved their Yak in position to strike next turn, since my Underground Boss wouldn't be able to stop it in time if I didn't move. The choice of Banquet was a little weird to me at first, but it works as a potential dissuader and gives the Yak more reach if I do flee northwest. Seeing I drew Scorchflame Spectre and had enough mountains up, I placed a desert. I could have used a prairie in the same spot while placing the other one beside my Underground Boss, but I figured preparing for Spectre was important due to the current board layout. I should have moved my boss north 1 tile before attacking to look aggressive and to possibly net more Faeria from the fish if ignored. Then I could have placed my guard where my boss used to be. It would have been aggressive, but I wanted to play on my side of the board just to be safer. Instead of trading and giving me more Faeria in exchange for destroying my unit, the opponent attacked me directly, forcing my units to move further back onto my side if I moved to deal with it. This was a good opportunity for them to block both sides of the core with prairies. The extra forest wasn't necessary for Tiki Healer, and while the healer is durable enough to destroy my boss and survive, I'm not sure placing it so early to contend with the numbers against me was a good idea. The Faeria could have went somewhere else, and the healer could have increased the opponent's effective life later on in the fight if I'm not running them over. Seeing Gift of Steel made me smile, but I decided against saving my Underground Boss and took the trade. Since the opponent gave up the opportunity to block me off earlier, I repay the favor and assert myself northeast. Grim is moved northeast to block a summon spot in the surrounding area. This also dissuades the opponent from placing lands around it, since it could end up a waste, and I'm poised to place lands on the central side of the board as well. The opponent uses 2 prairies here, attempting to assert that choice-centered tile on my side, while moving to keep access to their other Faeria well. They move their healer to strike my guard, while trying to net more value out of their unit before being eaten by the hungry hippo. Where Queen's Assassin was summoned was incredibly unfortunate. I think they didn't bother reading what my unit does. I hit the wrong chat here like a clown. I meant to hit the mistake one. Whoops. Here we can see Bursting Hippo's area of effectability do nice work. Another desert down. I'm looking to close the match out in the next turns here. Grim has moved centerboard to have the most coverage it can have. This is a pretty sweet spot for it here. Another gift of steel. This more or less cements it for me. Scourgeflame Spectre finally sees time on the board. I buff it to dissuade an attack from the bear. I moved the hippo over to gain more Faeria, but realistically I should have just ate the bear. The hippo would have been in a prime position to hit directly and also hit the air elemental summoned on the opponent's next turn. The match would have been over much sooner then. I moved my Grimguard over to cover for my Fragmenter, and my Southeast Elemental close to the center to cover the areas that Grim doesn't. My Faeria generation with all the wells is just enough to play most of the cards when I draw them, so I'm hesitant to give that up unless I'm absolutely going the net to win. I haven't drawn more Underground Units, Bloodsong, or Krog yet, so I should respect that. However, the opponent is out of options, and the match is over. I'm not sure what kind of deck they were trying to run, but it was in casuals. At the moment, casual matches seem like a good place to find my footing while I learn more about the kind of cards I want to be running. There is a massive list of ideas for decks I want to run through at some point, but that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want to join me on my journey of learning new things.